Secret identities and hidden truths are a dime a dozen in Berserk if you've been watching our recent videos. There are many facts hidden in plain sight that can only be discovered if you're watching intently for signs. And the fact that the mysterious kid that showed up at the beach near Ratanus was actually Guts and Casca's child was evident from the beginning. We just weren't looking for the signs at the time. The Moonlight Boy is one of the greatest enigmas in the entire story. At least he was, up until the recent run of chapters that Berserk has released. Volumes 40 through 42, the latter of which is due for publishing this September, have been a roller coaster ride through hell for the cast of Berserk. And believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, at the center of all the action is this black-haired, glassy-eyed kid. The Moonlight Boy's identity used to be a massive secret up until it wasn't, and ever since it's been revealed, the world has never been the same. But what exactly are the origins of this boy? How did it come into existence? And why is he one of the only people that could quite possibly bring an end to the God Hand's infernal plans for the world, albeit at a great price? We'll answer all that and more in this video. This is the Moonlight Boy's origins explored. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The boy shows up on a full moon night and casually prevents Guts from going full berserk. The Moonlight Boy's first appearance. The Moonlight Boy's first appearance is as conspicuous as it is unannounced, and perhaps that's why none of the Black Swordsman party members even realized that there was something kinda off about this kid. As Guts and Shirke conversed with the Skull Knight and discovered that there was a way to heal Casca after all, the branded girl herself wandered off towards the ocean shore, which is when she encountered the Moonlight Boy. Standing out in the middle of nowhere, entirely naked, it's rather confusing trying to figure out how the kid got to that shoreline in the first place, but that's also because we don't know its true nature yet. What we do know is that for some reason, the Moonlight Boy looks a lot like Casca, and seems to share an instinctual mother-son relationship with her, which includes her shielding him from the ocean breeze, feeding him soup like Farnace would feed her at the time, and sleeping beside the child as if it were her own. The first night that the group spends with the boy shows them nothing out of the ordinary, except for Shirke, who picks up a strange ode coming off of the kid. Other than his messy raven black hair and his massive doe eyes, which are a copy of Casca's hair and eyes, there is nothing in this boy's demeanor or appearance that would give away the fact that he is actually Guts and Casca's kid, because to them, their child was the demon child, and this boy looked nothing like that. That first night that the Moonlight Boy spends with the party, Guts thinks to himself that its relationship with Casca is quite similar to the one she shared with the demon child, and for the first time, Guts thinks of his own kid in a context that doesn't involve chasing it away or trying to stab it to death. The last time Guts saw the demon child was at the Tower of Conviction, as he ran Father Mozgus through with Dragon Slayer and fell alongside him towards the outer wall of the Tower of Conviction. Guts briefly caught a glimpse of the demon child, who was inside the body of the egg of the perfect world at the time. Now, Guts had not encountered the egg-shaped apostle directly, so he didn't understand what was going on with the whole glowing cocoon situation he saw in that split second. In his mind, the demon child was still out there somewhere, wandering through the endless night, and what made the frequency of his appearances go down was most likely the talisman that Flora had devised for him and Casca. You have to understand that this was a desperate time in Guts' life. He was grasping for literally any kind of help he could find or rays of hope he could cling to in order to find a way to cure Casca's sanity. So faulting him for not realizing that the boy in front of him, as he thought about the demon child, was in fact the demon child, is not going to do anyone any favors. What will do that, however, is talking about the Moonlight Boy's insane powers, which he ended up displaying on the starry shoreline that night, though the only people who noticed it were us and Guts himself. Despite being the most vulnerable person there, besides Casca, given his status as a literal child, the Moonlight Boy was actually the only reason that the Black Swordsman party made it through the Pishacha attack in one piece. When a crocodile familiar tried to approach the rest of the crew while Guts went berserk on its comrades, the Moonlight Boy was able to shoo it away with nothing more than a simple look. When Guts lost himself to the berserker armor and was about to attack Serpico and the rest, it wasn't Shirke's astral body that stopped his onslaught, it was the Moonlight Boy's. As Guts advanced towards his companions, driven insane by his bloodlust, the Moonlight Boy's luminous body appeared in Guts' consciousness and stopped him from doing something he would regret later on. It opened his eyes to the fact that he was about to attack his comrades, and Guts was instantly pushed behind by the force with which his advance was halted. Shirke noticed this break in the Berserker's power and took the opportunity to pull Guts out of his sinking psyche before he was completely lost, and that seemingly saved the day until the group realized that the boy himself had disappeared. They spend a lot of time searching for him because Casca is distraught over the child's absence for some reason, but they don't find him. Guts wonders whether the apparition that stopped him belonged to the boy for a moment, as we see the Moonlight child staring at the group from a distance with the full moon in the backdrop. The Moonlight Boy's first appearance tells us a lot about him without telling us a lot about him. He shares physical features with Casca and has inexplicable power over demonic entities like familiars for some reason. Despite being a child still in its infancy, the Moonlight Boy perfectly projects his astral body towards Guts' collapsing consciousness, which is something a trained mage like Shirke finds difficult to do. And then there's the flashback that compares it to the demon child in Guts' mind, which, as we've already mentioned, should have been his first hint that this kid was going to end up being more troublesome than helpful down the line. Every subsequent appearance of the Moonlight Boy follows a similar pattern, whereby he randomly shows up in front of the group on a full moon night, saves Guts from losing his mind to the Berserker armor, and then disappears after spending some time with Casca and frolicking around like the child it seemed to be. The Moonlight Boy appears a grand total of 3 times across the series. The first we've already covered. The second is when Guts faces off against the Sea God, where the Moonlight Boy once again stops him from accidentally killing his own friends and even saves him nearly drowning with the Sea God itself. The third time is after the group makes it to Elfhelm and Casca wakes up from her slumber as Elaine. On the first 2 occasions, the Moonlight Boy appears in front of Casca, but on the third occasion, it appears in front of Guts, which should once again have been a sign for him that this was none other than his own demon child in human form. But once again, we cannot blame Guts for this, because we ourselves only understood this truth when chapter 364 dropped on our heads, which ended up explaining the frankly disconcerting origins of the Moonlight Boy via the most notorious character in the series, Griffith. Guts and Casca's demon child that fused into Femto's incarnation vessel and is now a part of his body. The horrifying origins of the Moonlight Boy. At the end of chapter 363, the Moonlight Boy shows up at Elfhelm while Guts is training near a fountain. And this is by far the most freaky appearance because Skellig Island is said to be a very difficult place to locate and an even more difficult place to enter given its many security measures. Guts wonders aloud how the Moonlight Boy got there in the first place, but decides he will have the boy reunited with Casca nonetheless because that's who he always clung to whenever he showed up. At this point, the group's working theory was that the Moonlight Boy was some kind of emissary from Elfhelm. They arrived at this conclusion thanks to Shirke, who had stated multiple times across their journey that the only thing she could think of powerful and innocent enough to show up like the Moonlight Boy does was an emissary from the Flower Storm Monarch, quite possibly the Monarch themselves. The main logic behind her reasoning was that the Moonlight Boy always showed up on a full moon, and full moons were when astral creatures were at their strongest and most uninhibited. She held this belief all the way up until she met with the Moonlight Boy again at Elfhelm, because this time, Danan entered the room shortly after and immediately disproved Shirke's theory. Our best girl was thoroughly embarrassed, and Isidro made it a point to drive that embarrassment home by teasing her about it, but it did then raise the question. If the Moonlight Boy wasn't Danan, then who in the heck was she? The Flower Storm Monarch herself had no clue as to that, but what she did know was that the child itself harbored no evil in its heart. In fact, its life force was rather similar to that of the elves, and Danan couldn't even imagine the kid being related to anything like, say, a God Hand member, who were supposed to be the representatives of evil in this world. She still decides to observe the child during its time on Elfhelm, and its closeness with Casca is not lost on Danan. Neither is it lost on Casca, who now that she was conscious, realized that she knew the kid even before she met him as Elaine on that starry beach that fateful night. As Casca and the Moonlight Boy slept beside each other, Casca's mind went into deep contemplation about the feeling of familiarity she got from the kid, and just as she realized that it was the same feeling she had for her demon child, things went left rather quickly. Casca was jerked awake by her revelation, but she realized that the Moonlight Boy was no longer by her side. It was out in the courtyard with its back towards Guts, who stood staring at it with a gaping mouth as if he'd seen his mother and father come back to life. In front of their very eyes, the Moonlight Boy transformed into Griffith, complete with his flawless abs and his curly silver locks, and both Guts and Casca went into rather different expressions of the same emotion, pure shock and terror. Casca was shocked and horrified because Griffith was the cause of all her miseries post-eclipse. Go check out our video on when will Casca fully recover to learn more about that topic. Guts was shocked because he couldn't have imagined in a million years that this unwitting kid was his greatest enemy all this time, despite being the first person to make the connection between the demon child and the Moonlight Boy. So why didn't he realize it sooner? Well, it all boils down to optics, as it so often does, unfortunately. When the demon child was born in chapter 92, its parents had polar opposite reactions to the birth. Casca, the mother of the infant, instinctively moved to protect and nurture the baby because despite its demonic appearance, it was still her child, and she had a natural mother-son relationship with it, even for that brief moment that she held it after its birth. Guts, on the other hand, moved to immediately kill the demon child, because what he saw wasn't the seed of his own creation, he saw a hellspawn created by Femto. The demon child appeared like a half-human, half-demon hybrid from the very beginning. It had tendrils for appendages, a massive tumor over its right eye, and its left eye was always glowing with the same red flame that was carried by the eyes of apostles and God-hand members alike. Because of his recent declaration of war against all of demonkind itself, Guts instinctively moves to kill the infant. But Casca stops him, and this shocks Guts. He thinks that Casca is protecting a demon despite being in her mindless state because of demons. But the Skull Knight rolls up and explains the true nature of the demon child's existence. You see, it wasn't so much that Femto created life with Casca without her consent, it was more so that he corrupted the life that already dwelt within her with his evil seed. Skull Knight says that Casca was already pregnant before the eclipse, and the unformed fetus within her womb ended up getting corrupted by Femto's violation, and the result was the premature birth and rapid maturing of the demon child, which grew from the size of a thumb to an oversized baby within the span of a few panels in chapter 92. Unfortunately for Guts, it also meant that this kid he had just tried to kill was his own baby, and the realization didn't exactly soften his stance towards the demon child. Even after understanding that he was basically about to commit filicide, Guts takes the baby from Casca again with the intention of stabbing it to death, but before he can do so, sunlight breaks through the clouds and the demon child disappears into the astral world. Over the course of the next 2 years, it continues to haunt Guts on his journey to find and kill as many apostles as he can till he reaches the God Hand, because it naturally craves its father's attention, but its father seems to only want to kill it or run away. The only time Guts listens to his child properly is right at the beginning of the conviction arc, when the demon child manages to warn him that Casca was in danger, and Guts arrives at St. Albion as a result of it. It is at this holy ground, which is plagued by disease, lust, brutality, and all kinds of debauchery, that the demon child turns into the Moonlight Boy. The incarnation ceremony is essentially a mock eclipse that is supposed to bring a being that usually resides in the divine domain into the physical world, according to Skull Knight. It's a ceremony that occurs once in 1,000 years, but when it does, a God Hand member can basically gain a body of flesh and affect things in the physical world directly, as opposed to their usual clandestine methods of manipulating humanity into achieving the ends they deemed necessary. The incarnation ceremony that takes place in the current timeline brings the 5th God Hand Femto into the physical world in a body of flesh that resembles his previous form as Griffith. But there is a major catch in this incarnation. It's not an entirely unblemished incarnation because someone else shares Griffith's new body. That's right, it's Guts and Casca's demon child. During the conviction arc, the demon child plays 2 major roles. Number 1, he's a messenger of doom, which we've already addressed, and number 2 is that of a protector. From the moment of its birth up to the moment it transformed into the Moonlight Boy, the demon child showed a natural instinct to be with and protect its parents from harm. It tried doing so for Guts, but Guts doesn't need help, and the demon child got the message that his dad didn't really like him all that much. But Casca was different, in that Casca was mindless when she gave birth, so the demon child sort of knew it had to protect Mom when Dad wasn't around to do so. It spent the entirety of the conviction arc showing up on full moon nights and others besides just to protect Casca from evil, be it dead spirits, crazed cultists, or blobs of blood that suck human bodies of their flesh and soul, leaving only bones behind. The demon child is the only reason that Casca is even alive today, because if it didn't use its astral powers to protect her from the blood flow of the dead in the Tower of Conviction, there's no telling what would have happened to her. But this act of selfless love also proved to be its undoing, and this is where the whole Moonlight Boy situation becomes relevant. In chapter 165, we learn that after spending all that time defending Casca against God knows how many evil spirits, the demon child was actually on the verge of death. It had spent all of its energy trying to keep its mother alive, and was now about to die a cold and lonely death on a ledge in the Tower of Conviction. That's when it was encountered by another being on the verge of death itself, the egg of the perfect world. This egg-shaped apostle was the mastermind behind everything that happened during the conviction arc. He was reincarnated in the shape of a behelit with a brand of sacrifice on his tongue because he was about to become the very vessel for the new world. The egg of the perfect world was the apostle body through which Femto was to be reborn in the physical world. But its swallowing the demon child out of sympathy was most likely not a part of causality's plan, and can also be viewed as the conception point of the Moonlight Boy. When the egg of the perfect world comes across the dying demon child, it realizes that the kid is just like him, and decides to give it peace in its final moments as the very world around them transformed forever. It then completed its climb to the top of the Tower of Conviction, where it dug its tendrils into the ceiling like so many roots and slept off crying tears of blood. The tendrils ended up absorbing the blood flow of the dead, which is what ended up causing Femto's advent into the physical world. But a small complication occurred thanks to the presence of the demon child within the egg-shaped apostle. See, how we imagine the ceremony was supposed to go is the blood flow enters the egg-shaped apostle's body and it fills up with a likeness of Griffith, which then bursts forth into the world sporting all of his god-hand powers and none of its restrictions. What ended up happening is that the blood flow of the dead transformed the demon child into a human fetus, which then rapidly matured into Griffith. That human fetus was basically a representation of the Moonlight Boy, whose feelings now resided within the vessel that is Griffith, and we're made cognizant of this even before we see the kid personally. At the beginning of the Millennium Falcon arc, Griffith shows up on the Hill of Swords to confront Guts and Rickard and reaffirm whether his heart had actually been frozen by his transformation into a God Hand member. This is confirmed for him when he realizes he feels nothing upon seeing what is essentially a mass grave dedicated to the people he sacrificed for his current form. But the notion that Griffith is entirely emotionless is challenged when the fight between Guts and Zod ends up endangering Casca. Instinctively, Griffith moves to protect the branded girl, and it takes even him a second to realize what had just happened. When he does realize this, he immediately calls for Zod and departs the scene, telling Guts he was simply going to be chasing his dreams solely from this point forward, but internally panicking at what had just happened. We later see Griffith thinking to himself that the sudden protective feeling he had for Casca must belong to the child that fused with his vessel, and that should have honestly been our first hint that the Moonlight Boy is the demon child, because other than its appearance, all of its behavior patterns are consistent with its previous life. When the Moonlight Boy shows up for the first time, he is stuck to Casca, but extremely hesitant to even go near Guts. Twice, it sees Guts cleaning his throwing knives and moves its face away from him as if he was scared Guts would throw them at him. When he doesn't do that, the Moonlight Boy climbs on Guts' back, who ends up dropping him directly over his stack of knives, and he only just manages to catch the baby alongside Casca, which prompts Isidro and Shirke to remark that the three kinda look like a family. Casca snatches the Moonlight Boy away from Guts, but it is only after this act of protection that the kid starts helping Guts out as well, and actually interacting with him beyond giving him its patented doe-eyed stares. Shirke even says upon meeting the child a second time that she does not feel a sense of hostility from him anymore, which she felt when she met him for the first time. This is because before he became the Moonlight Boy, the demon child had to live through his father trying to kill him on multiple occasions, so the hesitation when he meets him again in a new form should have been obvious to us. Also, the fact that the Moonlight Boy's astral body is the only thing that can 100% calm down Guts is of special note, because we think the reason it works as well as it does is because of their familial connection, which Guts has been unaware of for a very long time. It's possible that he still doesn't know that the Moonlight Boy is his demon child fused into Griffith's vessel, because, well, he's currently going through a lot mentally, to say the least. But all these signs prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Moonlight Boy is Guts and Casca's demon child, and his hair and eyes at least make his maternal parentage rather obvious. But at the start of this section, we told you just how horrifying this fact was not just for Casca, but for Guts as well, because once he realized that the Moonlight Boy was actually Griffith, he started to attack Griffith, yet none of his moves seemed to even touch him, let alone inflict damage. The Falcon of Darkness casually used the fact that he transforms into the Moonlight Boy on full moons to not only infiltrate the one place on Earth that resisted his New World Order, but also secure himself from the threat of transforming at an inconvenient time. In chapter 358, after we see him convince the counselors of Falconia that they need to create a second empire for mankind, a la King Gyseric, and doing the deed with Princess Charlotte, we see Griffith sitting on a window ledge observing a few strands of his hair. Since the very beginning, Griffith has had flowing silver locks that are so perfectly curled that even women are jealous of his beauty. But now, a few strands of his hair had gone black. It was a full moon night as well, and we can hear Griffith say something to the effect of "tonight's the night" before he disappears, and all we see is his blanket and Princess Charlotte sleeping on the bed. After this, the perspective of the series shifts back to Elfhelm, where the Moonlight Boy makes his third appearance, and then, in chapter 364, he turns back into Griffith and everything goes to hell. But this gives us an idea of exactly how the Moonlight Boy can even exist in the first place. Throughout the series, Miura made it a point to show us that the demon child only occurred in front of its parents on nights on full moons. Then, he migrated this concept over to Griffith, but slightly adjusted it by having him turn into the Moonlight Boy on every full moon night and disappearing into thin air before showing up in front of Guts and Casca. The rest of the time, Griffith behaved and acted like his normal heartless self, and the only time his body would betray him was when Casca was around, because that's when the warmth of the feelings of the demon child became stronger than the coldness of his frozen heart. To put it in very short terms, Griffith will turn into a defenseless baby every full moon and go meet the baby's parents, and nothing he can do gives him control over it. It's just something that'll keep happening until one of them dies. So in order to ensure that he could at least control the circumstances of his transformation, Griffith decided to use the Moonlight Boy to kidnap Casca and bring her to Falconia, where he can control what she does and thereby protect himself from unwanted situations like, we don't know, assassination attempts with space-splitting swords or something like that. Despite clearly having great astral powers of its own, like calming down berserker Guts, shooing away familiars with a look, and traveling the branches of the world's spiral tree as if he was born on them, the Moonlight Boy doesn't possess the kind of agency to realize the complicated dilemma that is his existence. The Moonlight Boy isn't just the demon child in human form. It's Griffith and Femto and everything that comes with that put into a package that is also a ticking time bomb. The Berserk fandom has speculated for a very long time that the reason Miura included the Moonlight Boy in the story is because it's the only time Griffith is truly vulnerable, and that the boy's death is ultimately going to end up being what puts an end to his world-changing madness. And given the fact that Berserk is the type of story that it is, we can't say we didn't see this happening. In fact, we'd say this is probably what's going to happen, because giving Guts more reasons to struggle through his already insane existence is just what Kentaro Miura liked to do, and Fujimori has committed himself to that same vision with his directorship over Berserk's new chapters. There's the Sword of Actuation as well, and it's quite possible that Big Boy Rickert and his newfound gang of Bakiraka assassins and the Grand Wizard Daiba will also whip up another alternative for defeating the God Hand, but our cynical minds will keep circling back to the Moonlight Boy's demise as being the possible climax of the story until we see those alternatives. And as depressing as that is, it's also a testament to the sheer poetic tragedy that is Berserk. Marvelous verdict. But the real tragedy is that this is all we have for you guys for now, because this is where we have to end the video. The Moonlight Boy is undoubtedly one of the most beloved characters from the entire franchise, thanks to his fashionable hairdo and his immense powers, but also because of his complicated existence and his beyond problematic origins as well. At this point, we don't know when we'll see him again in the story, but we know that we will, because otherwise what's the point of kidnapping Casca and making it a whole thing? But that's just what we think. Let us know what you think down in the comments section down below. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep struggling, strugglers.